Tonight, 2 suicide car bombs in Baghdad kill well over 100 people. We'll have the latest on the stepped-up violence and its impact on U.S. strategy. I'm Russ Mitchell. Also tonight, plan of action. How the declaration of a national emergency in the fight against H1N1 flu changes the rules for doctors on the front lines. Ahead of the curve, Frank Lloyd Wright's once controversial Guggenheim Museum marks a half-century of turning heads.
One of the greatest museum buildings of all time.
And screaming success. How the low-budget fight film Paranormal Activity struck box office gold.
This is the CBS Evening News with Russ Mitchell.
And good evening. The search for survivors continues tonight in Baghdad after the city was shaken by the deadliest attack there in more than 2 years. At least 147 were killed and more than 600 injured by a pair of suicide car bombings targeting 2 government buildings. So far, no one has claimed responsibility, but tonight, accusations are flying and fear remains on the streets of Baghdad. Elizabeth Palmer begins our coverage. A warning now. Some of the pictures you're about to see are graphic.
Police were still scrambling to respond to the first massive blast when just 1 minute later, a second huge bomb went off. Iraqi security forces started firing either in panic or in warning, but the 2 suicide car bombers were already dead, along with dozens of innocent civilians who minutes before had been going about their business on an ordinary working day. As rescue workers tried to reach those still alive but trapped, the walking wounded like this man headed away, deafened by the blast. Several Iraqi government buildings, including the Justice Ministry and Baghdad's district council, were left in ruins, every window blown out. Dr. Salah Abdel Razak, Baghdad's governor, was in his office at the time.
The bodies have seen it is these innocent people, what they have done. So to have this destiny, it is very terrible.
Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki made a brief visit to inspect the carnage. But Baghdad's shocked citizens want to know why their politicians still aren't able to protect them. Where is the government? Asks witness Ishtar Talib. Where are the security forces and their security devices? Many Iraqis believe radical Islamists are to blame for this double suicide attack, working hand in hand with disaffected Sunnis, former Ba'ath Party members who resent Iraq's Shiite-dominated government.
This method of the Qaeda, but they have been supported logistically by Ba'ath Party.
This attack had been carefully planned. The security perimeter in this area had been relaxed just a few weeks ago. U.S. commanders in Iraq warned that violence like this is going to increase in the run-up to elections in January to stop people from going to the polls. Elizabeth Palmer, CBS News, London.
For some perspective on how today's bombings could affect Obama administration policy in Iraq and Afghanistan, we were joined in Washington by CBS News analyst John Dickerson. John, good evening to you.
Good evening, Russ.
Can this be seen as a big setback for the Obama administration in Iraq?
I don't think so. If it's just a kind of one-off, the way administration officials talk about it is in that way. What would worry them is if this were the beginning of a long string of attacks. But they hope that it's just one big, ugly event and that things will settle back down again afterwards.
Of course, the president still has to decide what to do in Afghanistan, send more troops, bring some home, stay the course. Will what happened in Iraq this weekend, in your mind, affect the Obama administration's decision on Afghanistan?
There are so many other things to think about on Afghanistan, the nature of the government there, the situation in the various parts of Afghanistan, that this is much further down the list, and that's what administration officials say. So this probably won't have much an effect on Afghanistan. However, if the president does decide to add more troops, it does make the environment in which he would have to make that case to the American people a little more difficult. These kinds of bombings remind people of just the carnage that's associated with more troops overseas.
Former Vice President Dick Cheney is accusing the Obama administration of dragging its feet on Afghanistan. Are you hearing other sentiment out there along those lines?
Well, there's been some elite opinion about the pause in the president's thinking. The benefit for the White House of having Dick Cheney come out and use the word dithering is, one, Senator John McCain came out and said, Well, he wouldn't use that word. And so it puts Cheney out there as a kind of boogeyman the administration can point to. He's not terribly popular outside of conservative circles. And also, it allows the administration to talk about the situation they inherited and the neglect of the Bush-Cheney years. And that neglect is something not just Democrats talk about, but the generals who are fighting this war and trying to win it talk about that same neglect. So in some ways, Dick Cheney is a gift for the White House.
CBS News analyst John Dickerson, as always, thank you very much.
Thanks, Russ.
Health officials battling the H1N1 flu virus this weekend have received 2 booster shots of their own. President Obama has declared the virus a national emergency, a move that cuts bureaucratic red tape. And the FDA has approved the emergency use of the experimental antiviral drug Peramivir. With the outbreak now touching 46 states, the new help comes not a moment too soon. Randall Pinkston has more on the view from the medical trenches.
With the H1N1 flu virus spreading farther and faster than expected, the emergency declaration from the White House means healthcare providers can respond to the crisis faster and bypass some federal regulations.
This is a proactive move to basically get rid of the red tape so that hospitals don't have to fight with regulators if the H1N1 endemic gets bad later on.
The emergency declaration allows the Secretary of Health and Human Services to waive federal rules for hospitals, allowing them to set up alternate treatment sites for H1N1 patients in schools, community centers, even tents, or special treatment sites inside hospitals, which is what Baltimore's Johns Hopkins is doing.
Actually, it's sort of a lounge so that patients can go there directly and not have to mix with all the other patients in the emergency room. It's a way to sort of protect them and also protect the other patients.
Meanwhile, in cities like Des Moines, Iowa, the demand for the H1N1 vaccine continues to outstrip supply. Nationwide, only 11 million doses have been distributed, not the 120 million federal health officials had expected to have by now. The virus seems to target young people. 100 children have died so far this year. Originally, the CDC had recommended the vaccine for everyone under 25, but because of the shortage, the vaccine is being given first to high-risk groups, such as healthcare workers, pregnant women, children 6 months to 4 years of age, and infant caregivers.
That's why I got here early, so that I knew that they would get the vaccination.
The federal government hopes to have 50 million doses of H1N1 vaccine by mid-November. And as you mentioned, Russ, the government has approved the emergency use of an experimental drug, Peramivir, which has already been given to at least 8 people who were near death from H1N1. They survived.
Good news. Randall Pinkston, thank you so much. Also this evening, there is good news for the more than 10 million Americans who suffer from some type of vision disorder. Doctors say the story of a young man from upstate New York showcases the success of a new treatment for blindness. 9-year-old Corey Haas is spending his weekend sightseeing in New York City. But unlike most tourists, he's not just seeing New York, but everything for the first time.
No, I haven't really dreamt about coming to New York.
Corey Haas was legally blind 13 months ago due to an inherited disease called Leber congenital amaurosis, or LCA. He wasn't able to read in school or ride a bike.
2 years ago, we would have thought that he would have gone blind.
Corey is one of 12 participants in an experimental gene therapy trial done by Children's Hospital of Philadelphia that successfully restored most of Corey's eyesight. Here's Corey before the surgery, unsuccessfully trying to navigate an obstacle course set up by the doctors to check his vision.
This is being really hard.
This was Corey just months after, completing the course in about 30 seconds. A miraculous change. Here's how the procedure works. Scientists use DNA from a DNA bank to create a functioning gene, a gene which Corey was missing. The gene was then injected into the eye with a thin needle. This new gene will make a missing protein inside Corey's faulty retina, helping to restore his vision.
These results have really shown that we're capable of having such a phenomenal effect on the retina, really bringing vision back.
We had to basically teach him to see again.
Corey and his family now have a whole new perspective.
It's like an answered prayer. To know that something can cure him.
And doctors at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia have more encouragement for Corey and his family. They have agreed to perform the procedure on his other eye as well. Jeffrey Pickauer, an associate of Bernard Madoff, was found dead this afternoon at the bottom of his swimming pool in Palm Beach. Pickauer was being sued for $7 billion by the trustee seeking to recover money on behalf of Madoff's victims. The suit charged that Pickauer should have known that the Madoff funds were a fraud and that Pickauer's claims that he was a victim himself, quote, ring hollow. Coming up on tonight's CBS Evening News, a look at companies where part-time employees get full-time benefits. New York Senator Charles Schumer today said Democrats are close to having the 60 votes needed to include a public insurance option in a health care reform bill. Schumer says the plan may allow states to opt out of participating in the public option. 60% of businesses in this country currently provide health benefits for their employees, but only half that number cover part-time workers. Michelle Miller takes a look at two companies that do in our series Prescriptions for Change.
You're not your typical starving artist.
No.
Are your friends jealous?
A little bit, I think, So I do what I love.
What Lauren Roth does is draw enticing signs for this Whole Foods supermarket in New Jersey, but her heart is in painting.
I was able to work part-time here, keep my health benefits, and still be a full-time artist.
And she's able to do that, even working fewer than 30 hours a week. Whole Foods is an atypical company providing access to full health benefits for its part-time workers.
Before I started working here, I was paying almost $400 a month, and that was just medical, not vision or dental or anything. So.
And now?
Now I pay around $2 for everything.
Of Whole Foods' 51,000 employees, 10,000 are part-time, and 1 in 5 of them opt into the plan.
And we hear from our part-timers that they really want the benefits, and since it is benefits at a reduced rate, it just makes sense. It's a win-win for them and for us.
Fewer than a third of American companies offer their part-time employees health care benefits, and large companies like Whole Foods are twice as likely to offer coverage than the nation's smallest businesses. In fact, 60% of companies with 5,000 or more employees offer health benefits to part-timers, while only 27% of firms with 200 or fewer employees do so.
Their premiums were through the roof.
Most small businesses say if health care were more affordable, they would provide it. But for now, it's usually a choice between providing benefits or a pay raise.
There are a lot of part-time workers who aren't demanding the health insurance so much as they're demanding more cash.
One of the rare small businesses that does provide the coverage is San Francisco-based Support.com. Its 400 techies work part-time from home, giving the general public computer help over the phone.
You can't overestimate the importance of health benefits and the related things to getting a really talented workforce.
Support.com's president, Josh Pickus, says even if the benefits cost more, they're worth it.
We think this all makes good business sense over the long run.
This is another example I've done for the new coffee roast.
For part-timers, the health benefits are a real pick-me-up.
If you didn't have this, what would you do?
I probably wouldn't have health insurance.
Or probably as much peace of mind. Michelle Miller, CBS News, Montclair, New Jersey.
And next up on tonight's CBS Evening News, for 50 years, it's inspired love and hate. We'll tell you why. Beginning 50 years ago this past week, out-of-town art lovers visiting New York have headed straight for the Guggenheim Museum, only to follow a twisting path once they get inside. Controversial at birth, the museum is now an architectural icon. Seth Doan takes us on a guided tour.
Even as the Guggenheim turns 50, it's still turning heads. Architect Frank Lloyd Wright's famous Spiral Museum attracts about 1 million visitors a year. But in 1956, when it began to take shape on New York City's Upper East Side, it attracted a lot of criticism.
New York is usually a follower, not a leader in stuff like this. And suddenly New York has the most radical building in the world.
Back then, the New York Times called it a war between architecture and painting, in which both came out badly maimed. Still, Frank Lloyd Wright, who died 6 months before the museum opened, dismissed critics of his only creation in New York City.
Somebody said the museum out here on Fifth Avenue looked like a washing machine. Well, I've heard a lot of that type of reaction, and I've always discounted it.
And history, it seems, is on his side. Paul Goldberger is the architecture critic for The New Yorker.
It's one of the greatest museum buildings of all time.
So,
wow, that's
not a small
statement. It's not a small statement. It's a very serious statement.
Frank Lloyd Wright's design takes museum goers along a continuous curving ramp. The space and the art itself unfold in front of you.
In fact, the original museum was called the Museum of
Curator Carol Vale says that
Hilary
presents an
Bay
advantage
had very
and a challenge.
set. You have to take the space vertically and horizontally. I mean, you have to be able to try and visualize the art from all kinds of angles and perspectives.
And through its quirks.
We have to come up with special devices and contraptions to hang the paintings so that they can, in fact, hang straight.
Today, it's Kandinsky on the walls. His work is often considered an ideal match for a museum designed to hold abstract and contemporary art. Though a quick visit reveals that the art can almost seem like an afterthought.
How much time do visitors spend just looking at the museum versus the art? And is that frustrating as a curator?
Well, it's frustrating and it isn't. Of course, we're delighted if people come and look at the building. At the same time, you do want them to be able to look at the art.
An artistic conflict that Wright purposely intended.
Art and architecture can enter into a dialogue with each other. They can actually kind of get in the ring and joust a little bit with each other. In fact, sometimes it can create something more exciting.
Exciting indeed, even 50 years on. Seth Doane, CBS News, New York.
You could say there were 2 extra personnel on the football field today in Houston. Former presidents George W. Bush and his father, George H.W. Bush, greeted players before today's NFL game between the Texans and the 49ers. The elder Mr. Bush, as you can see there, flipped the coin at midfield. And just ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, small budget, big profits behind the scary success of the hit movie Paranormal Activity. In a pre-Halloween battle of fright films, Paranormal Activity came out on top at the weekend box office. Paranormal took in some $22 million, beating out Saw 6 and last week's winner, Where the Wild Things Are. Giving new meaning to the term low budget, Paranormal was made for practically nothing and marketed for not much more, mostly on the internet. But the payoff, as we just heard, has been huge. Sandra Hughes has more.
It was audience reaction that first started selling the scare in Paranormal Activity.
My girlfriend Katie, she thinks there's something in the house. I don't know.
You believe me, right? What is it? Then enthusiastic critics jumped on board with rave reviews. The studio limited the showings to a few small theaters, driving fan interest even higher.
I drove 6 hours to see this movie.
Creating a box office phenomenon with an initial marketing budget of practically nothing by Hollywood standards, barely a TV commercial, newspaper ad, or billboard in sight. The studio set up cameras to record audience reaction and let the fans do the work. What are they doing exactly?
Well, for one thing, Paramount created a page with this site called Eventful, where fans in certain cities could demand that this movie play within a certain radius of their town.
The movie also has almost 100,000 fans on Facebook and thousands of Twitter subscribers. What brought you here?
Actually, I was sucked in by her because she wanted to see it, and I actually first heard about it on MySpace.
It was shot by video game creator Oren Peli in his own home with $15,000 and 4 unknown actors. He was inspired by documentary-style films like The Blair Witch Project.
The movie became very successful, so I figured, I should give it a shot as well.
While the movie is now backed by a big studio, Paramount still wants to keep the image of a little homemade film. A little homemade film that has now grossed $40 million and is just this weekend open in wide release across the country. And as for claims by some that it's the scariest film ever made,
well, it was edge of the seat the entire time.
Made me jump twice.
Jump high?
A little bit high, yeah.
Did we go back in time and space?
With Hollywood reeling from some big budget flops, little Paranormal Activity may just rewrite the script on how to make a hit. Sandra Hughes, CBS News, Hollywood.
And that is the CBS Evening News. Later on CBS, 60 Minutes and the high cost of Medicare fraud. Thanks for joining us this Sunday evening. I'm Russ Mitchell, CBS News in New York. Harry Smith will be here tomorrow night, and I'll see you again first thing tomorrow with Harry and the gang on The Early Show. Good night.